The Business is sponsored by Kingston Smith Chartered Accountants.
Hello and welcome to The Business, the show that's essential listening for the West Herts business community. Tonight we have a very special show on a very sensitive subject, chasing down debts and late payments. Do you have a client or a customer who can't pay or won't pay? And what can you do about it? In the studio, we have the man who can tell you how to get others to pay up. He's David Baum of Denham Collections. We also have fantastic contributions from Gemma Newing, a debt recovery lawyer from Sherrard's, plus a view from the boardroom with Finance and Ops Director Isabel Dolan. Between them, they'll be helping to explain how to stop these late payers from being forever in your debt. Chasing a bad debt can be a time-consuming and awkward business. And in the run-up to this show, we've also asked listeners to share experiences. And so many thanks to Anique Devillard of The Rooster, Deanne Gold of iPoint Market Research, and even a lawyer and friend of our show, David Hughes of Canopy Law, who all nobly stepped forward to tell us their debt-chasing stories and give their advice to listeners. You'll be hearing from them later. But first, as always, I am indebted to my co-presenter, Vicky Scott, for joining me this evening. How are you, Vicky?
I'm very well, and I'm hoping that I'm not going to get quite as tongue-twisted with this debt-collecting business.
What's caught your eye in the news?
Well, before we get on to all the terribly serious stuff of debt collection, I thought we'd kick off with a slightly shorter and sweeter and lighter note. I was really delighted to see reports from the BBPA, and for those that are not in the know, that's the British Beer and Pub Association. What they've recently reported is that sales of the good old British pint have shown their biggest quarterly increases for 17 years. It's also the highest rate of interest since the launch of what I think is rather lovingly called the Quarterly Beer Barometer.
Oh, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, it does sound fun, doesn't it? So what a great job to be in. Anyway, so what did they put the growth down to? Well, there's obviously loads and loads of info about the effects of reducing duty, the effects of a late Easter, and even the disastrous for England World Cup. But the thing that I found really interesting to me, and it complements so much of what we talk about on this show, was the industry and analysts who cited the dramatic effects that the new craft breweries were having on beer drinking in general.
Right.
So it was just brilliant. You know, once again, the customer has spoken and they want good quality niche beers with different taste profiles.
It makes me think about things back to February when we did our focus on niche businesses. I wasn't involved in that show, but I remember you and Roma were sort of talking about it, particularly in the sort of post-recessionary phase, you know, and I think it was Melissa Kirby who did the safari holidays and everything, and there's just so much that it's important that there's all over the country there's an army of niche businesses who are very attuned to particular
and it's fantastic to hear that they're not only doing really well themselves, but they're sort of changing the shape of industry, which is it's great news. You know, I mean the British pint, not that I'm a massive pint drinker, but you know, it's now got a bit of reputation for being a bit mass produced, a bit bland, you know, but possibly a bit cheap, but hurrah for the independents. Hurrah. I think the other thing to say about this is that, you know, it goes back to that old adage, and we say it probably every single show, that if you put your customers first, you listen to what they want, then they will follow you. They'll follow you to the beer tent or wherever your business is, if you choose to ask them and get them involved.
Well, that's absolutely right. Now, my story is, I suppose it's a personal debt story, analogous with the business debt theme that we're tackling in today's show. The statistics show this week that we are now back. We've sort of pulled ourselves back to the level of GDP that we were at the start of the recession. So is it then as if it had never happened, as if it was all a dream? Well, definitely not, because when adjusting for inflation, the household income figures show that the median household income is now down by £20 a week. And that's in real terms, and those in the top 10% are £60 a week off. So it's not the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and because only those in the bottom 10% are actually just £2 a week better off. But what this is saying also is that personal debt is still a big problem. In fact, personal and business sectors are still awash with debt. And I suppose my challenge, if you like, is that have we really solved the problems of debt? The message to homes as well as businesses is probably watch your cash flow. Especially when the good times are coming
starting
back.
to roll again. Yes.
Yeah.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? How people get into a roller coaster. They get into terrible debt. They spend an awful long time getting themselves out of it. Things start going well again, and then they just sort of crash on and go back straight into the quagmire of financial mess. It is quite staggering that people do that. But hopefully this evening, with some of our guests, some of our clips, some of our coverage with people around and about in the West Herts area, we'll put some of these problems to rights, and we won't all get back into all sorts of debt. But please, if you are chasing debt out there, if you've got late payers, if you really want a bit of a specific advice, do get in touch with us. The studio number is 01727 839 926. That's 01727 839 926. Tweet us at rv_the_business. That's at rv_the_business, or email us, thebusiness@radioverulam.com. We will endeavour to pick up your phone calls, pick up your tweets, and answer any queries.
And we'll be right back with David Baum from Denham Collections right after these messages.
When you're locked out, call us out. We'll get you in, have no doubt. Locksmiths Hertfordshire, we're here for you. Free phone 0800 1182 182. Locksmiths Hertfordshire are local, friendly and fast, so call us first. Don't call us last. When you're locked out, call us out. Locksmiths Hertfordshire, we're here for you. Free phone 0800 1182 182. Free phone 0800 1182 182. Calls from mobiles may vary.
Wondering what you could do this weekend? Well, you don't have to go far from home. There's plenty to discover on your doorstep. Join me, Ellie O'Fira, this Friday at midday, when we'll be giving you some great ways to get out and about close to home. That's Out and About, Friday at midday, here on 92.6 FM, Radio Verulam.
Kingston Smith Local Chartered Accountants, proud sponsors of the business, helping our clients succeed.
Radio Verulam Community Partners.
Hertfordshire Chorus is one of the finest large choirs in the country, performing at the top venues throughout the UK and regularly touring abroad. This nationally acclaimed choir is here on your doorstep. They rehearse every Wednesday in Hatfield and are always happy to welcome new singers. So if you're looking to join a top-class choir, then go along to any rehearsal. If you're not a singer but enjoy listening to good music, why not go along to one of the concerts? Details are on the website, which is hertfordshirechorus.org.uk.
For more on Radio Verulam Community Partners, go to radioverulam.com/community partners.
Welcome back to the business. It's just coming up to 10 minutes past the hour. Now, I'm delighted that we've got in the studio with us David Baum of Denham Collections. Good evening.
Good evening to you, Trevor, and to Victoria.
Right, and wonderful to have you on the show. Now, could you just tell us a little bit about what you do? I mean, we've got a theme for the show, so it might be guessable by listeners, but maybe a quick sort of patter about what you get up to.
I explain to all our clients what we don't do is batter doors.
Yeah.
What we do is provide credit control with an iron fist in a velvet glove.
Right.
Our clients don't want to lose their clients by our actions, so we have to basically resolve issues. And the issue can be, I'm not going to pay my invoice, I won't pay my invoice. And the skill is then deciding whether there's a reason why someone won't pay their invoice is correct. Has the service been poor? But if you can work that one out and you can then talk to people, we then actually get told by the debtors, we're very nice people and thank you so much. And we've got commercial clients now who originally were debtors but appreciated how we operated. Meant we could actually help save their business. They've moved forward and we now do their credit control for them.
How did you get into this business in the first instance, David?
Well, for those who know me, long story short, I started off as a hairdresser.
Different.
And then I moved into a business with my brother doing promotional merchandise, and unfortunately he developed MS and went off to live in Australia, and I lost the balances that I needed, which was what's happening, why aren't we being paid? And I was just chasing turnover, and it's that old-fashioned slogan, turnover is insanity, cash is sanity, and I forgot those rules. And unfortunately I had 3 companies went down on us for about £60,000 at the time, and I chose the course which I think was far better, which was to wind the business up while we could afford to. And a friend of mine said, "David, you might be a rubbish administrator, but you're a great salesman. Come and work for my husband." I said, "Well, what's he do?" "Debt collection." And I'm not a debt collector. No, we don't want you as a debt collector, David. We want you to do what you do best. And that's how I got involved in the industry. In 2007 I had enough of working for Muppets, as I called them, because I couldn't make them aware of what my clients wanted. They didn't want a them and us approach. They wanted, we are all together. And I wanted to do things differently. And the company I was working for at the time imploded. And I decided, well, the 3 directors each offered me independently the chance to take over the business. And I thought, you know what, let's take a chance. Worst happens, I'll get a job elsewhere in 6 months. And 7 years down the road, I've now got 12 people working for me, a board of directors, and a very strange life.
Well, we're going to start sort of picking David's brains on this, aren't we, Vicky?
Yes.
First of all, by giving a bit of context.
So what we're going to do across the show is we're going to look at a variety of clips and different scenarios, as Trevor mentioned early on. We're going to have a little listen to how various people have come up against problems and their particular thoughts, and then David, hopefully you'll add your 2 pennyworth and any additional thoughts. So the first clip is Trevor actually went along and met up with Gemma Newing, a debt recovery lawyer at Sherrard's, and he started off by asking her whether chasing debt had become more of a problem in the last 5 years since the long recession began.
The situation with bad debt has always existed, but the recession certainly brought matters to light, where a lot of businesses found that they needed to pull their socks up, actually be quick in terms of recovering the monies owing to them, or they would be a casualty of that recession. So what I have seen is a number of clients actually coming to us asking for assistance in how they can tighten up their credit control procedures, or for some to actually put some procedures in place. Right. So whilst the recession has seen an increase in the amount of debts out there looking to be recovered, I think it's safe to say that the debts have always existed. It's just the way in which businesses actually go about recovering.
So businesses become just a bit more streetwise in actually going
yes.
about chasing down.
Yes, because I think the realisation was that, to coin the old phrase, cash is king, and the amount of businesses that were failing in 2008, 2009, for example, I think a lot of my clients at least saw that they needed to do something pretty quickly to avoid themselves being a casualty.
Right. What are the impacts of having to chase a bad debt? Now, obviously there's financial impacts,
of course.
but not just financial, also in terms of the anxiety and stress it causes, and I suppose the time as well that it takes.
I guess a lot depends on the size of the organisation and whether they have got any real systems in place to begin with. Having a small organisation with perhaps a large business, if you take an example where you've got a small business supplying materials to a larger business, and that larger business decides that they can monopolise the situation, drag their feet in terms of paying, that can be a very stressful situation for that small business. But I think the priority is to ensure that they have systems in place to make sure that if they get into that situation, they know what to do and to avoid the stress as much as possible. For larger businesses, they are likely to have systems in place and they may take a more robust view. So whilst there is always going to be a stressful time recovering debt, if you have systems in place, then it can only help to minimise that stress. And in terms of the financial costs for chasing a debt, again, it comes down to the systems that are in place. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out process, because at the end of the day, you as a business can call the shots on when you say enough is enough, I want payment.
Enough is enough, David.
Yes.
I mean, interesting clip there. One thing that struck me about the whole process of collecting debt, the whole emotional drain that it puts on people. You know, I mean, you must have clients sort of coming to you and actually they're sort of at their wits' end.
Well, the funniest thing is that actually for the first time a solicitor is actually talking sense. However...
Harsh.
No, it's not when it comes to credit control and debt collection. But the problem is, it's at what stage do you then get involved? Unfortunately, at Gemma's stage, it's often it's at that very emotional page. What we try and educate people to do is have proper credit control procedures. Years ago, that every company would have had a credit controller, and the companies that had the robust credit control that would enforce their terms and conditions never had a problem, very rarely had a problem with bad debt. And Joe was saying about the big organisations, most of the big organisations do not have credit control in place. They are reliant on a handshake and I'll get paid in 30 days. And those that have a better form of credit control, that aren't afraid to pick the phone up and go, at 21 days, how are things going? Everything okay? And keeping a line of dialogue going with their clients. It's a far better way of doing it. I mean, we do credit control for a number of clients where we don't even mention we're debt collectors. As far as they're concerned, we're part of the company. And very few go over 30 days, because that's our job, is not to do that.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the other problem, of course, is once people go beyond the 30 days, the next invoice is already coming and landing on the doorstep.
But
suddenly things start getting out of hand.
I mean, one of our clients provides security to the building industry, and the building industry, like many big boys, have stretched the terms. So when he started working on their behalf, it was 28 days. Then all of a sudden he's being told it's month end following. Well, he doesn't want to lose the client, because it's big money. We're talking £20,000-30,000 worth of billing, but he can't afford to keep paying his staff. And but it's one of these cases where it went from credit control to debt collection, and policy within Dean, and when it gets to that stage, it's I deal with it. And I ended up speaking to the financial controller, and we're talking about a public company builder, and I said, I'm concerned your company's about to go bust. And he was spluttered and said, how dare you, sir, we're not going, what makes you say that? And I said, well, you haven't paid my client's bill. Our terms are month-end following. I said, yes, this is month-end following plus 1 month. As far as I'm concerned, everything tells me your company is struggling for cash, and I may have to report you for trading insolvently. He said, hold on 1 second, before we go any further, I'll call you back. When he comes back, he said, I'm so sorry, I've just seen the invoice sitting on the side for signing off. We're going to check off next week. And I went, no, that now means it's month-end following plus 6 weeks. Yeah. I want the payment done today. Or I will be pulling security off-site. This is a Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. How do we do that? I said, it's called backs payment. You go online, it's called internet banking, and I don't mean to be sarcastic, sir. Okay, it will be done. And then I actually dropped the bombshell. They actually owed my client another £2,500 under Late Payment of Commercial Invoices Act. And he wasn't very happy, but when he discovered that he wasn't as big as the European Union, he ended up paying the £2,500 on top. But that's because I knew where I was going with that. The trouble with a lot of people, they are frightened to say, I will stop supplying you.
Yes.
And that's no good.
Yeah. It's your. I mean, is it? You've quoted quite a lot of knowledge there already. I mean, is that? I mean, are there a lot of people there who are debtors who are just trying it on, but actually don't know the law and are actually, frightened into paying because actually they realise that actually they are breaking about 15 different laws at the same time.
The biggest threat we can do. I mean, we are limited. And I shouldn't say this obviously on air, but the law is much more in favour of the debtor these days than the creditor. And so there's only so many things you can do. If a company is not frightened of having a county court judgment against them, one more isn't going to do that. However, if the threat is actually you're trading whilst insolvent, which is a criminal offence.
Yes.
And if it's a large enough debt, then the directors can be held personally liable for that. All of a sudden, it focuses the attention. But more often, it's someone that just wants to play for time.
With some of these larger companies, there's also the sort of grey market, actually sitting on cash and making quite a lot of money out of sitting on other people's money.
Well, it's not just the large companies, the small clients. We have a client who does puts together promotional merchandise, and he had to pay a printer. And so the bill goes out, it's £2,500, and they're not paying. And all of a sudden it's, well, why aren't you paying? Oh, well, we haven't had the invoice, we're not happy. And they kept delaying. And on Friday, after we spoke, my collection manager Sandra spoke to them a couple of times and started explaining what would happen if they didn't pay, and if they're unhappy with it, what are you unhappy with it? Amazingly, the payment arrived, as if by magic. And then it was followed, well, would you have a word with your client if he would like to do the next job for us, please? Sandra said very carefully, well, I'm sure if you'd like to pay your bill on time, sir, he'll be more than happy to do that.
Right. We're going to actually play a clip now. We've got 3 clips coming up of businesses that have sort of stepped forward, volunteered their stories. And the first of those is Anique Devillard of The Rooster. And I started by asking her to tell me her story of chasing a debt.
Yes, well, we are a marketing agency, and I remember it was in December, just before Christmas, and one of our clients was rather desperate to get some printing done. So we helped him out, got out of our way to find a printer who would do the work at very short notice. We managed to do that. We delivered the work. It was just before Christmas, and then we issued our invoice as usual, in January, I think, when we got back after the Christmas break. And this particular client was always fairly slow paying our bills anyway, so we were not worried when after a month we had not received any payment. And then we issued the usual reminder letter we send, as our usual practice. However, 3 months later, he still hadn't paid. So I managed to talk to him, and I said, look, what's going on? We delivered this work, we assume it was okay. We have not heard from you. And then at that point, he said, oh, well, I was not very happy with the printing. And so I said, well, this is fine. These things happen. But if you had told me when you took receipt of the order, I could have done something about it there and then. As it happens, many months have now passed, and, we have had to pay the printer for the work. You didn't mention anything was wrong with it. And I'm sorry, but you will have to pay the invoice. And basically, he said, well, it was most unlikely that he would pay. So I was not very happy with this, because we had worked with this person quite a long time. We had helped him out. And all he had to do after receipt of the order is to tell us that it was not quite what he was expecting, which would have been fine. These things happen all the time, and we fixed them there and then. So I was quite annoyed, as you can imagine. So I started to go on the internet to see if there was any way I could start a process myself to try to recover the money. And a friend of mine in publishing mentioned that she had used Denim Collections a few years before and had been really happy with her service. So I thought, oh, what a good idea. So I happened to know David from networking events, but I never thought of using him. And to my amazement, a couple of hours later, the money was actually in our bank account.
Crikey.
I was just amazed. And but what amazed me is how professional the whole approach was. I was very concerned about using a debt collector because, I didn't want my business to get a bad reputation. Debt collection was associated in my mind with heavies knocking on the door, and threatening people. And this whole process was very professional, very ethical.
Very professional, very ethical. We need to stop your head swelling there, David. So obviously one of your clients there. One thing she said, though, was this belated thing from the debtor: we're not happy with the work. 3 months down the road. Is that usual?
Happens quite regularly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a reason. I mean, occasionally there is a problem, and we've had this time where they've actually said the reason we're not paying is because it was the wrong colour. It wasn't right. It was, and there are genuine reasons for not paying. We had this ourselves as a company. Someone was offering to do us a service, and I was very unhappy with the service provided. And in the end, we agreed to meet in the middle because I wasn't happy, and I wasn't prepared to pay the full price. It does happen ever so often, but in this case, it was just he just didn't want to pay. When a neat French lady, what does she know? Other printers I can go to, other designers I can go to, other marketing people, tough. And it was just one of these phone calls on a Friday afternoon, about 1 o'clock. Hello, sir. My name is David from Denham. I'm calling on behalf of the Rooster. Your invoice is considerably outstanding, and I'm concerned, obviously, that my client's not being paid. And if we will be looking for X, Y, Z, and when will you be paying it? Oh, is that due for pay? Oh, please send my apologies. I'll do a back pay. And how much? So I told him, and it obviously went through. And what was lovely was I then phoned him on the Monday morning, said thank you very much, the payment, I understand, but you didn't pay the charges. And according to my client's terms and conditions, which unfortunately I had rewritten for a NIG about 2 years previously, which I built in the ability to claim back late payment charges and costs incurred. Amazingly, he agreed to pay those charges to Anik as well. And what made it nice, she didn't have to pay us anything really, because our fees were taken care of by the debtor.
It's very good. I had an incident where I had a client that said that they weren't going to pay me because of after the event they didn't like the service, and I had probably about 50 or 60 emails thanking me for the fantastic work, recommending me to other of their colleagues. I'd got about as much sort of information from them saying how fantastic everything was as you could possibly hope for. So there was no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely not just about.
Whilst they budgeted, say, for the event that you were looking after them for, they expected the event to generate X amount of income. And if the event doesn't generate that income, or something else takes, they hadn't expected, say, a tax bill or another bill that took precedence, all of a sudden they haven't got the money. So all the positiveness is great, it's great, and if you had to go to court, that will stand in good stead. But ultimately, the reason they're not paying, as I say, it goes back to two reasons. I can't pay, and I won't pay. And the artists understand why won't they pay.
One thing though that Anik said was, which is possibly dangerous in a way, is that, but understandable, was that she said the client was slow paying bills anyway, so we weren't too worried.
Yes.
And is that it's really understandable. We're all doing so. We prefer to think the best of people, especially if in the past they have eventually paid up. I mean, but it's. Would you encourage people to sort of move away from that thinking, even with people they know?
Of course. I mean, we have a client who provides green groceries to the restaurant trade, and he has got a lot stronger. One time, he's a lovely, lovely man. He and his family are there to help clients, and they would deliver fruit and vegetable at 3 o'clock in the morning to the restaurant, so they'd be ready in them. And the idea is you get paid the following week. And often people would delay it, and also get to 3 or 4 months, they're still delivering the fruits and the vegetables. And I'm going, well, why? And a lot of the time they've had to go back and say, look, we need to be paid on, and you're going to have to pay us something on account of the old bills. Why allow people that privilege? I mean, what I think always gets me is we can't go into the big supermarkets and say, I'll have £500 worth of groceries this week and I'll pay you next month. It doesn't happen. And in most businesses, we give people the opportunity to actually catch us. But what shouldn't be forgotten, 90% of all businesses pay their bills on time, or they have communications with their supplier and arrange separate pay. So we're not talking about a large proportion of the commercial world.
It's always good to remember that, actually. When you focus on something like this show, you do start really worrying that any of us are ever going to stay in business. But no, you're absolutely right.
The one thing everyone must do is, when they're going to business, you've got to make sure your terms and conditions are right. You have to understand when you're going to be paid, what happens if you're not going to be paid, and never be frightened to pull the plug on a non-performing customer.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got another clip. This is another of your customers, isn't it? Isn't it, Vicky?
Yes, this is Deanne Gold of iPoint Market Research, another of David's customers. So I hope he's going to actually be able to get out of the studio this evening, because I've got a feeling that she's saying some lovely things too. Trevor asked her about her experiences.
I was outstanding a debt from one of our members when we had our networking organisation, and we've obviously contacted her several times, wrote to her, she still wasn't paying, trying to avoid it, trying to make every excuse under the sun, and in the end I went to David Baum and explained the whole situation to him, and he said, leave it to me and I'll chase it for you.
Yeah.
He chased it and he wrote to her and he got the money for us.
Right. And what was in terms of the tactics you'd used up until that point? I mean, it's a very awkward and sensitive thing, really, isn't it? Chasing money. I mean, so you wrote, you phoned. I mean, what was the reaction when you tried to get the money?
It is a very sensitive thing because we were running a membership organisation, so when we had to chase the money, it was people that we were seeing on a regular basis, having breakfast with them, networking with them, supposedly trying to pass some referrals and things, and it's very hard when somebody owes you money. It's very hard to sort of like be able to sort of like do that when you're outstanding money from them. So there is a little bit of emotion that comes into it, but eventually, when you're running a business, you have to take the emotions out of it.
Yes.
Because you're not a charity, so you have to take the emotions out, and you have to basically sort of get tough and ask for the money.
Right. And how long was the process from sort of awkward chasing to eventual resolution? First of all, before you contacted David, and then once David got involved?
I would say from beginning to end, because we started the process of chasing and we probably didn't contact David to sort it out till possibly about 3 months later. So I would say the whole process was about four months.
For other people listening who might be chasing down a debt, I mean, do you have any advice for people about how to go after the money? Because although you've been chasing down one debt, of course you've been very successful in obviously collecting in for most of the rest. Are there particular systems or structures you need to put in place to make sure you're all kind of tickety-boo on that front?
I think every debt is different for every company. If it's repeat business, it's very, very hard to chase debts and certainly get a debt collector involved because it might cause friction between yourself and the client.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people think that the word debt collector means that somebody's going to come knocking on their door. But from my own experience, I know that that's not the case. So, I mean, my advice probably to people is try and retrieve the money yourself first. Speak to somebody, because often it can be the case that there may be a genuine reason why they haven't been able to collect the debt. Maybe somebody just hasn't got the money. Often when you speak to people and they tell you the reason, it could be an acceptable reason. But if it gets to the point where we had this, where they were just sort of avoiding us and sort of making excuses and things like that, then I think it's time to get in sort of somebody a bit more professional.
And they did get somebody in a bit more professional. But on this point about that Deanne said about, well, we're not a charity. I mean,
Correct.
But we are. We're all just far too charitable towards people, aren't we? I mean,
it goes back. I mean, when I had the other business, as I said, I learned the hard way. Everyone's so busy chasing turnover that they forget actually it means nothing unless you get paid. And with Deanne, it was the funny thing, so I knew the person, and sometimes it's actually easier when we have people say, who I know. And this phone call is, hi, look, I've been asked to have a chat with you. Before I'm officially instructed, we need to sort this out. And that generally sorts it out. It's the ability to bring in a third person, knowing that they won't bang on the door, they won't ruin the relationship they choose to enjoy with their clients, but they need to get the money in. And as I said, it goes back to being able to credit control. This ability not to be frightened. I mean, for Deanne to see the person week in, week out, and to be able to sit there and as a networking referral organisation, to be able to pass out referrals to that person, knowing that they still owe the money for their fees, it's much harder. So it's a much more tactful approach. You have to be very tactful. You can't go, give us your money, mush, because they don't want that.
Do you think that, I mean, I'm absolutely certain that there are bad debtors in every country in the world, but do you think that the Brits are particularly reticent about talking about money and a bit too sort of polite to ask for the cheque?
I think, as I said, it's got better, but it's amazing. I mean, we get work from all over the world to collect from debts in the UK, because a UK company owes a company in Germany. They don't really care. But as we said, I went back to what I said before, 90% of business is actually no problem. It's only 10%. One thing has come out of the recession, and according to the papers, we're actually now in a better position than we were in 2008 before it hit the fan, is that people have learnt that you can't just keep giving away money. If you wish to stay in business, you have to be firmer.
But David, I mean, a lot of people say that when you come out of recession, it's probably the most dangerous time.
It is.
In terms of cash flow.
I mean, what happens is when it's really, really tight, people are much firmer with it. As we come out and more business coming, they tend to allow it to get a bit more loose. But it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Once you start seeing, actually, that invoice, an old invoice is being collected, and we can actually get our invoices in early, then they're less likely to go back. But there's always going to be people who will allow themselves to be caught.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. We're going to go on to our final of our trio of people who had sort of experiences in chasing down debt. It was actually we made a sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek comment about lawyers sort of earlier on, but a very good friend of our show is David Hughes. Canopy Law also speaks a lot of sense, and Vicky went to get some advice, but in the process found that, to her surprise, that lawyers can also get stung for bad debt.
So, David, I'm staggered to hear that it happens to lawyers as well. I thought everybody paid up when it came to law, but you just mentioned that you've had some problems in the past.
I have.
So what happened to Canopy Law?
So even with lawyers, I found that that people, thankfully, rarely don't pay invoices, and we've had to chase a couple of invoices.
And how did you go about it? Did you throw the hard end of the law at them, or what did you do?
Well, so debt recovery is not really what I do, so I had to outsource it to another lawyer, which was a bit galling to have to get another lawyer to do work. But that's what we did, and it was effective. We got paid on both invoices.
And what did you learn from it? Are you doing things differently now that you can, give us all some tips on to the way you now do things that stop other people sort of bad debting with you?
Yes, in fact, the best lesson was not getting paid and then learning what I should have done in the first place. So I learned that I should have issued terms and conditions, which on one of the jobs I did, I didn't do. I didn't issue terms and conditions in advance, so that was a cardinal mistake, especially for a lawyer. Secondly, we changed our payment terms to bring it down to 14 days, so that we knew very early on if there was a problem, if we weren't getting paid. Previously, we hadn't started chasing until 30 or 45 days. And I know
now, you mentioned the big word chasing. Did the lawyers do the chasing for you, or in your usual accounting now, do you have somebody that does your chasing for you?
I've got a bookkeeper who does the chasing, which last year we didn't have, so that's really helped. So she stays on top of when we're getting paid.
And shortening your terms and conditions, did you find any problem with that? Were people happy with 14 days rather than 28?
I felt really uncomfortable asking for that money so quickly, Thankfully, the bookkeeper asks for it now for me, so that helps with my discomfort.
And people pay.
And they do, and really, I mean, when I thought about it, there's so many services I use where I have to pay in advance.
Yes,
so
yes.
Asking for money after 14 days really isn't that bad at all.
And do you point it out to clients when you sign the contract or when you get together and you decide you're going to work for somebody? Do you point out that your terms are 14 days, or do you just hope they read the small print on the invoice, or what do you do?
Unfortunately, I hope they read the small print. So it's in my terms and conditions that payment terms are 14 days. Now, I don't point it out. In fact, what I really should do is ask for the money in advance.
Right.
But I don't. I feel very uncomfortable doing that. So we ask for the money in arrears, but within 14 days. And actually, I don't think that many people would have a problem paying us in advance. I just can't bring myself yet to cross that.
And any other tricks? So you asking for money in advance, you don't do it yet, but you would recommend that people should.
Yes.
And we all do that. We're all happy for paying for certain services. Why is it that it's only certain things and not others? Is it just the people who are brave?
I think so. I think in this day and age, so much of what we buy is we have to pay for it in advance. I mean, certainly anything that you'd buy on the internet is you have to pay for in advance. I don't really think that too many people have a problem, although I do think a lot of business people still feel very uncomfortable, and I count myself as one of those.
So there you go. Lawyers do get stung too. But I mean, how honest I think of David to come forward and actually say that he actually had suffered from the same problem. But I mean, he made a good point. I mean, Victoria sort of had sort of incredulity in her voice as well about well, why shouldn't you be paid up front and so on. But that's
actually it's I think a part of the SRA rules are you're not supposed to incur a debt you're supposed to get paid within the agreed terms. But it's not just solicitors, barristers, accountants, solvency practitioners. All the people that you think would never have a problem have problems. But what was Dave was saying, he's got proper terms and conditions now, but how many people actually read the terms and conditions? I mean,
well, that's why I asked him that very question.
Well, when we create terms and conditions for clients, I always put a trigger question, because I remember being asked to review a set of terms and conditions that had 75 clauses in there, and clause 35 looked like Latin to me. I don't speak Latin, but both of my sons were at Watford Boys, and I said to Philip, who was doing Latin, what does this mean? And he looked at it, he got out his dictionary and he's turned the pages and he's writing his notes. He said, it doesn't make sense. He says, there's two parts to the sentence. The first part is taken out by the second part. What is it? So I found my client, she says, I didn't know it was in there. That was the trigger question, which said, I've read your terms and conditions, I understand them. Because in law, if you take them to court and there's your terms and conditions, I've signed for them. If they haven't read it, tough. So I've changed the terms and conditions. We took it down to that 28, but clause 14 is you will provide my client with a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits. Now, the guys who check my terms, all the work we do afterwards, said it's not enforceable. I said it's not supposed to be enforceable. What it's supposed to do is ask the question, why do I have to give you a plate of... And we actually had one client who phoned me up, he was killing himself laughing. He said, I sent him my terms and conditions. He said, I got there was a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits waiting for me. And he said, can you change it to a glass of scotch and a Bible, please? I said, you can have whatever you like. It doesn't make any difference. But people often don't read terms and conditions. When we send anything out, any instruction form out by email, a lot of it's done by email these days, we will automatically attach a copy of our terms and conditions. And we had a client the other day, one of the barristers' chambers were working, said, you haven't got anything about where payment goes. And I said, well, actually it goes to you, sir. That's our preference. Would you put it in writing, please? I said, yes, of course. He said, that's good. And he'd actually read the terms and conditions, and I was quite happy with that. But if you don't read, if you are buying goods and you don't read the terms and conditions, and you get taken to court, well, then it's you should have read the terms and conditions.
Right? I think it is a lot easier when you've got something to sell, something as opposed to a service.
Well, solicitors,
it is quite a bit easier.
I mean, we used to have quite a lot of fun with solicitors. It was always the ones who offered a half-hour free consultation, and it would always seem to be the dour Yorkshireman would be picked up on the fact that he was waiting there 14 minutes before he saw the solicitor, and not paying the bill until you pointed out that she was a 2-hour consultation, and yes, he did get the first half hour of the consultation free, and the 40 minutes waiting in the reception was not included in that 2 hours. And then all of a sudden it says, oh, and you say, but I wasn't aware I was having to pay anything extra. And I said, well, that's the term, that's what you should. So there we go.
Right. So I think what we're going to have to do now is just have a very, very quick break, and then we'll come back. We've had 3 people who have sort of experienced the problems of a bad debt, and then we'll get on to a bit more about what to do about it, along with David's help.
You're listening to The Business on Radio Verulam, with a voice of the local business community on 92.6 FM and on radioverulam.com.
So, clip 5 is Isabel Dolan. Isabel is a finance and operations director who's recently set up her own business, Intuity. She's a lot of expertise as CFO and COO. And I asked her, what are the factors that you can exploit to ensure prompt payment from clients?
It's usually a combination of factors, you're absolutely right. It's always good to get your invoices right and on time and accurate to your client or to your customer. Definitely know their process so you can track your invoices through. Otherwise, you could often miss a whole month's worth of payment run just inadvertently by not knowing their process. So yes, it's around things like that, getting it right first time and submitting your invoices promptly.
So it's interesting what you just said about their process rather than your process. So it's not just about having your own process, it's also understanding theirs. So you mentioned a payment date. That's certainly something that I've come across where a client sort of said, oh, well, you've missed this month's, you have to wait for next month's. Is that something that you can get round? Or is it really as set and rigorous as that there's just one day that the payments go out and there isn't flexibility?
Well, it's really good to know how your client or your customer work. So find out from them, develop that relationship with their accountant or their bookkeeper or your main contact within the business, and find out up front how their process works and runs. Yes, businesses usually do 1 or 2 payment runs a month just to cut down on admin and just to get things out of the way. It is possible to get emergency runs done in the meantime. Clearly it is, provided they've got signatories around, but people do tend to prefer to work to fixed payment run dates.
And is it important to sort of almost have a name in the account department that you can go to, that you develop a personal relationship? Is that something that can work?
Absolutely. Get a contact, develop a relationship with them, and then you have an advocate within their business to help push your invoices through the business, to maybe collar the managing director to approve them on your behalf. It makes life a lot easier.
So it makes life a lot easier. I mean, that thing about developing the contact. I mean, it's a really important point, isn't it?
Correct.
Knowing the system inside out.
That's what she was saying there. It makes perfect sense. Everything is correct. And if the world was like everyone acted the same way, I wouldn't have to worry about doing my job.
No, well, that's the point, isn't it? If you have got systems in place and you've got terms and conditions and you do all the chasing and you're rigorous about it, then you shouldn't really get into trouble.
But the trouble is sometimes, as I explained about with the security, with the builders, clients will often change their terms. We had it. It's not that long ago. It was in the paper where I think it was M&S upset a lot of their suppliers. And if it's not M&S, I do apologise. And this is nothing to do with the radio station's comments. This is my comments that they had said, well, if you want to supply us, you're going to have to be the payment terms are now 180 days. And if you want to supply us, that's what you're going to have to accept or go elsewhere. So you have to be wary that your customers could change it. And if the customer feels that they are bigger than you, they will dictate the payment terms. You've got to know that, actually, I don't want your business, and walk away.
Now, wasn't there a sort of government initiative recently, or somebody's initiative, the big business initiative, to encourage people to join a good payment scene.
There's so many initiatives out there. I mean, even to say the EU, bless them, for once they actually did something right. They made it the European standard where you have the late payment of commercial invoices Debts Act 2013. The only problem is it's actually unenforceable unless the courts dictate it.
Okay.
But there are a lot of it in there. But the best thing you can do is vote with your suppliers. If you are supplying someone that doesn't pay you or taking longer and longer to pay, just say, if you obviously don't like my goods, I'm walking away. And if you want my goods, pay me within my set terms.
Right. We're going to just have a little clip of a specific point about Gemma Newing from Sherrard's, coming back to her maid, about the difficulties of that cut-off moment when you decide that an existing debtor, giving him or her an extra week to pay and then crossing your fingers is actually not the best way to go about it. This is what she said.
I think it's very easy to get caught up in that situation, especially if you've been dealing with someone for a long time, you've got that personal relationship in place. I think it's very easy to say, okay, I'll give you an extra week, and then the weeks just keep rolling on. I think you need to be very disciplined and realise that it's a matter of business. Take all the personal emotions out of it and be very focused to say, well, we need to come a point where there is a cut-off. There may be some genuine reasons why payment hasn't materialised, but you need to be disciplined to say, well, if you've given them so many extensions and still you're getting the same or a similar nature of excuses, you must say enough is enough. And the fear is if you allow that situation to continue where the excuses are just continuing to roll, the company is doing something behind the scenes, perhaps to your detriment. So I think you need to, as an individual, take out that personal feeling of perhaps I will help someone and say, no, I'll be very strict about it. And sometimes people find that very difficult to do. As I said, if you've had that relationship for a long time, it can become very easy. And clients often come to me to say, well, I'd rather you deal with it because you don't know them. And it takes that personal element out of it.
You've said a number of times this evening, David, that taking that personal element out of it, operating as a third party, people who are doing the selling, it's very, very difficult to also be asking for the money. It does sound as though this is leaving it a little bit too late.
It is. I mean, the problem they've done the last recession is they get rid of the credit controller, so the salesman then has to be, it's your customer, you collect from them. The trouble is, how are you supposed to sell to someone who owes you money? And then you're frightened, well, I'll pay you next week, next week rolls over. At some point you have to make that decision, as Gemma was saying. And I think what companies have to look at is you have to start investing in actually having either an independent company or someone dedicated within their office environment to do the credit control.
There must be a moment. I kind of finally asked Gemma about when should you actually give up a debt, because all that chasing, you've got to ask sometimes, is that worthwhile? And this is what Gemma Newing of Sherrard said.
I think for the wide majority of cases, it's always worth pursuing, whether by way of a letter before action or a statutory demand, because that will be a good indication of the response you receive, of what that debtor's intentions are. If they immediately make payment, all well and good. If they come up with a wide range of excuses, perhaps even disputing the debt, then depending on the situation, you then have the conversation with the client. Do we pursue this, or do we simply write this off and move on with matters? But I think it's always important to take the first step to actually press the trigger button to see what the reaction is. And the reaction you get is going to be key in determining whether you then take the next step or whether you decide, okay, enough is enough. There
we go, that phrase, enough is enough, again. David, enough is never enough in your case. So in terms of, we've only got a couple of minutes, but what do you think? Should you ever give up on a debt?
No, but I think actually just thinking about it, what you should be doing right at the very beginning before dealing with anyone is do a correct credit check on them. And you'd be surprised how many times companies have actually got poor history, and they're the ones that always cause the problem. But never give up. Unless someone's actually gone into bankruptcy or liquidation, the debt is always potentially recoverable. And if you're working with an agency such as us, it's no result, no fee. I think a lot of solicitors are beginning to offer that service now. Never give up.
And is there a deadline on collecting money?
The statute of limitation for court action is 6 years from the date of the last communication. But if a debt is 6 years overdue, then it's not so much a debt, but actually it should be buried and long gone. But
don't give
usually
up.
Don't
particularly
never
if
give
you
up.
can see
but
that
if you're getting, all I would say to anyone who's listening tonight, if you've got an invoice that's over a month overdue, consider talking to a third party to assist you. We are not ogres. We're not going to batter down the doors. We're not going to allow you. Well, I can't speak for other agencies, but our job is not to destroy the relationship you choose to enjoy with your client. Our job is only one thing we do, which is collect clients' money.
David, thank you so much for helping us tonight. Explain how to get people to pay out. That's David Baum of Denham Collections. We've also had fantastic contributions from Gemma Newing, a debt recovery lawyer from Sherrard's, plus a view from the boardroom with Finance and Ops Director Isabel Dolan from Intuity. And then also we had our sort of our willing contributors in terms of their stories: Anik Devillard, Dean Gold of iPoint Market Research, David Hughes of Canopy Law as well. And so thanks, and all I'd like to say now is thank you for listening, and hope to hear from you again soon in a future show.
The Business is sponsored by Kingston Smith Chartered Accountants.
If there's anything in the show you want to talk to us about, phone us on 01727 839 926 or email thebusiness@radioverulam.com.